So for Austin FC to make the playoffs, they have to beat Portland on Wednesday. They have to win their remaining two games, which is against the Galaxy and the Rapids. Portland has to lose their last two games. At that point, they would be on 45 points, each have 12 wins. So it goes to a goal differential as the next tiebreaker. Portland is 20 goals ahead of Austin right now, so they would have to make that up in three games, which seems tough. Of course, if they do beat Portland 5-0, they're halfway there, but then they still have to make up another 10 goals of goal differential. And if they tie on that, then it goes 2 goals for, and Portland is best in the West with 64. Austin is decidedly not with 34. So they would have to score 31 goals to Portland's 0, which I calculated would be a goal every 8 minutes and 42 seconds. So if Erling Haaland is available, let's get him on the phone and see if he wants to play for Austin for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
As a trialist, just to see.
Yeah, just to see if he's good, right?
Emergency podcast. They did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, hurry up, shut up, hurry up, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies, and certainly there are emergencies afoot for the first team who is on the cusp of being eliminated from the playoffs. It's not official yet, but it's pretty darn close, as we just outlaid. And then also for the second team, which actually has a better chance of getting to the playoffs, but a lot of things need to happen. Starting at 3 p.m. today, we are recording this a little afternoon. Moisés, how are you doing given where everything is at?
I mean, the last few weeks, I think for a lot of people have been kind of preparation for where we find ourselves here. Going back to when we started doing a whole lot of number crunching math on the other side of Leagues Cup to see what the final run of games was going to require. Folks may remember that I made as a baseline, what if the first team starts with a 5-game winning streak? Not because I thought that was realistic, but
Yeah.
because I thought that looking at both the math and what you need momentum and vibes and emotion wise, that was kind of what they needed.
Yeah.
And without that kind of momentum cascading them towards something realistic and not, as you just described, something that has never happened in the history of Major League Soccer in terms of pace of goal scoring in the final 3 games of a season, nor has anything even approached that. Just to make it clear for folks who may look at the standings table and go, well, the league doesn't say that they're officially eliminated. They're not officially eliminated. And this isn't us being pessimistic. This isn't other people being pessimistic. And also, to be real clear, this isn't a result that either one of us are happy about seeing or willed seeing or we're hoping for in any way. It's a lot more interesting to cover a team that is winning or has a chance to win.
Absolutely.
This is just straight up realistically where things lay at the moment. You mentioned the second team. We'll get into that. There's some of that is out of their hands, but provided a couple of results go at least a certain direction this evening, then they are definitely still alive through decision day in ways that
Which
are not
is
as
next week.
far-fetched. Yeah, next Sunday,
Yeah.
3 p.m.
Yeah. So there was a moment in that Whitecaps game that could have made a big difference. And again, we don't want to necessarily go back into parallel universes, but Andres Cubas had a shot in the second minute of stoppage time in a game that looked like either of those teams could win in the last 15 minutes, hit the post. If that had gone in, at that point, Portland would have lost 2-1, let's say. So Austin only needs to overcome getting to 3 wins versus Portland's 3 losses, because at that point they would have been just 8 points behind and had the opportunity to get 9 points, and none of those tiebreakers would make a difference. But we are where we are. I mean, again, that one point that Portland got, I mean, as soon as we finished up the press conference with Josh Wolf last night. Portland equalized towards the end of the first half, and that's basically where it stood. Like that was the final score of the game. That was the final scoring. So again, yeah, sometimes it does come that close, but again, I mean, we're looking at a first team that down the stretch went 1 win, 3 ties, 5 losses in their final 9 games up to this point. So that's just the thing. They needed results late in the season. Even just kind of looking at potential projections, I thought they would finish up a little bit better than they did. I thought they'd get a couple more wins in there. You had a kind of wildly optimistic scenario that you talked about, the 5 game win streak and all that. But still, if they had put together a few more wins, they'd be in the playoff hunt right now. And just when they needed it, they couldn't get it done. So that's obviously concerning on behalf of the players, on behalf of Josh Wolf, who certainly has a share of frustrations that he's shared with us in recent weeks. And now, yeah, we're just kind of coming to this juncture of, okay, they're most certainly not going to make the playoffs unless unforeseen things happen. So at that point, do you bring Wolf on for a 5th season, or do you let him go? And I kind of know where a lot of the fan base sentiment is at this point, but he has in recent weeks been trying to make the case about the bad hand that he was dealt at the start of the season, having the limited roster and all that. That's come up a bit. Obviously, the team has been in good positions to score. They haven't been doing that. And we're at this point right now where they needed to deliver results. They couldn't get it done. The weird thing is right now is that Portland is actually on 45 points, and I assume that they'll get a couple of more. We used to think that 45 points was safe for getting into the playoffs. I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, I think there is going to be quite a divide between the top 9 and the bottom 5. Dallas could kind of jump in there and make a case. They're playing Portland at one point. They could get some points in there.
Phil,
West
nobody
is gonna
wants
have...
that reality. Nobody wants
Oh, I know.
that reality to happen.
But I'm just saying that the kind of things that we had kind of understood before about what it takes to get in the playoffs, even with the 19 playoff, is teetering a little bit. So it does maybe take a little bit more than just that 45-point threshold to get there, which kind of puts the season into a little bit of a different light. Ultimately, I don't know that it matters, but to me, from somebody who does gravitate towards those kind of numbers and likes those kind of semi-truths, it's a little bit, I don't know, just a little bit world shaking at this point for me.
Yeah, there's in the just over 25-year history of MLS existing, we see new rules and new playoff dynamics and that sort of thing. Next Pro is a testing ground for things like that. When Next Pro, there are no straight up 1-point draws. In the case of every draw, there's a PK shootout, and the winner of that PK shootout gets an extra point. Is MLS going to adopt that? In MLS Next Pro, there is no play-in game for 9th place. They have 2 separate divisions per conference. And the guiding rule there is that the winner of each of those divisions is guaranteed one of that conference's 8 spots in the playoffs. And then the remaining 6 are the next 6 teams overall on points between the 2 divisions. But I had trouble figuring out the math of how that would just be any different than than the top 8 teams overall, rather than trying to make it seem like divisions actually mattered. There's some things like that with Next Pro doing things a little bit differently than the top league that make me go, is that something that they're going to actually try to do with MLS proper? Or is that just them going, we'll see if this works? And very clearly it makes no actual difference.
And they just take the top 8 teams in MLS Next Pro, which again, I would be fine with. I think that's fair. I think that's appropriate. I don't necessarily think that the play-in game is something that the league really needs, but
let's
it
just
does
say
award
it.
one more spot per conference.
Let's just say it. Does the notion of the play-in game actually excite anybody? Is anybody excited about, oh man, we've got one last chance to squeak into the playoffs? Does it really, if after this run of form, Austin had made 9th place, just barely, which FC Dallas is theoretically capable of doing, would that actually do anything for that fan base? Would that team actually stand much, if any, of a chance in the playoffs? I don't think so. I don't know that it actually does the league any favors do
Yeah.
that for the sake of technically making the playoffs.
I mean, the way that the playoffs are set up now, what that does do is that gives the ninth place team a chance. One game, they have to do it away. But if they do that, given the best of three first round series, they're guaranteed a home playoff match. Albeit it is against the conference leader, probably
Yeah.
does not go that well. But that is something where you can have a team theoretically have a home game, win that home game, extend the series, and at least give their fans that, which I don't think is super convincing in terms of this is a reward that we are getting as fans. I don't think that fans are necessarily going to be jazzed about that, but it is an opportunity to be in the postseason. And again, when you get in there, strange things can happen and teams can advance through the playoffs. I mean, it's not unheard of. I believe Kansas City did that with St. Louis last year. So it is possible. It can happen. You can have a team squeak into the playoffs and then make a little bit of noise. But in terms of getting to MLS Cup and winning MLS Cup, your chances are pretty slim at that point. And again, if you are in ninth place, it's probably because your team has some deficiencies compared
Yeah.
to the top teams of the conference.
I mean, would you say that doing that last season helped keep Peter Vermees's job?
Well, he's kind of a special case. Like he's sort of his own boss and he's been there forever.
There's a
So
lot of
I
blood
think
magic around
I
that
think
guy.
if it was, let's say it's like Coach X on the cusp, yeah, I do think that by virtue of winning that playoff series against St. Louis, even though St. Louis was a little bit found out,
Mm.
yeah, I think that would have been enough to maybe tip it in Coach X's favor. But yeah, for me, I think he was going to be staying regardless. But that they were able to get from such depths that they were able to sneak into the playoffs and that they were able to do that just shows that yeah they do have metal and they indeed do have good veterans on that team, and Vermees does in those situations know how to coach. I mean, again, obviously this year things are a little bit different, but that's a team in desperate need of remaking. But at the same
Yeah.
time, they also got to the Open Cup finals. So you have to give them some credit for that as well. That's a real competition that's obviously been transformed a little bit. You have teams at the top and the teams at the bottom of MLS that were not allowed to have their first teams in there for reasons. Again,
Mm.
SKC had to beat teams better than them to get to better in terms of regular season records to get to that final and to visit LAFC and then lose. And then, of course, 3 days later, they have to play their rival St. Louis and lost last night. So, yeah, I imagine that is a pretty deflated team at this point.
And I don't want to play into the mythic narratives of Kansas City and that region of the country being the ancestral home of U.S. soccer and a sacred, hallowed place, for which soccer just means more than the rest of the country or something. But uh, Kansas City making it to an Open Cup final means something specific to that fan base, that area of the country,
Mhm.
where let's say, for example, Austin had made it to that U.S. Open Cup final, certainly would have meant
Mhm.
something. But
Sure.
there is a sort of deeper local meaning and association with that competition in particular, that coach in particular, that I think did more for him than it would necessarily other coaches.
Mhm.
But I feel like we've got to talk about the coach on the hot seat stuff. Since last
Mhm.
night, we have been
Right.
chattering between the two of us about a variety of different scenarios, a variety of different
Mhm.
things that could be at play. I didn't stay for the post game press conference, even though I assumed that things were going to be pretty bleak in terms of players even remotely interested in talking to somebody, especially considering that the unified game was last night immediately following
Mhm.
the first team match, and many of the players either went straight out to watch that or showered real quick to go out and watch that. I was there for the one before. What was this press conference like? I still haven't watched it. It was a late night. I had other stuff to do, and I figured,
Right.
well, we're going to record at noon. Phil can
Mhm.
fill me in on
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
missed.
Okay, I did want to say one thing about Kansas City first.
Yeah, do it.
Kansas City native Colby Gordon with the Statesman, started a press box discussion, as he likes to do. He gave us 2 Robert Plant songs, solo songs, mind you, and wanted to know which was the better. Neither was not an option. And then I came back with, okay, who had the better solo career, Robert Plant or Robert Palmer? And he instantly said Robert Palmer. So I just wanted to share that's what happens sometimes when there's not a lot going on the offensive end of the field, and you are just kind of watching a game for the next interesting thing to happen. Sometimes those conversations take place.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
guess to cue up that post game thing,
Mhm.
the press box, everybody is generally pretty attentive. Where things
Mhm.
are in the season, though, attention
Mhm.
spans were, a little bit all over the place.
Mhm.
When RSL was awarded that penalty, I had to clarify to everybody what was going on because I think attention had drifted quite a bit by that point, where it was kind of like, well, I,
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah, it
I
was a little
guess,
confusing. There was this kind of long, weird pause in a section of the game where Austin was already down and wasn't really generating a whole lot. And then, yeah, lo and behold, it's a Owen Wolf handball, and RSL goes up 2-0. And I immediately start writing it as a loss. And then lo and behold, thanks to 82nd and 89-minute goals, I had to do a rewrite, which again, usually I enjoy doing rewrites in those situations. But again, just given where things were and just keeping an eye on Vancouver Portland in the post-match press conference, and that there was that level of hope. And then Portland equalized right as Wolf was finishing his comments. And, as he was getting off the podium, I said, yeah, hate to break it to you, Portland just equalized. Now, I didn't really catch what he was saying, but just kind of like, okay, not necessarily knowing how that game's going to turn out, because obviously, as he likes to say, goals change games, and certainly that goal changed that
sure
game.
did.
Vancouver certainly, again, like we talked about before, had that chance to get a winner at the end, which would have, again, I don't know that changes the trajectory. I don't know that Austin rattles off 3 wins and Portland loses 3, but certainly given who they're playing, it's not entirely inconceivable. I don't think it's likely, but yeah. So anyway, we wanted to talk about, yeah, the post-game press conference. Josh, I think, was actually at point still kind of thinking, okay, Vancouver's up, was receptive to my pointing that out, thinking about, okay, Portland, they score a lot of goals, but we're gonna get in there and we're gonna fight. And Ring was talking the same way, right? So Ring was, when you talk to him, he was talking about, we keep fighting until we're entirely out of it. There's kind of no other way that we know, which again makes sense. And I did, and you can see in my article today, I did get him to talk a little bit about, I framed it in terms of, you're coming up on the end of your 4th year. What have you learned? How have you grown and developed over this time? And then he talked generally about the team and coaches and personnel. And then I asked him, how have you personally developed? And he gave me a little bit more. And it's good. It's a good glimpse into who he is as a human being, who he is, who has certainly tried, who has had just kind of some difficult situations along the way, DPs that haven't worked out, U22 players that haven't worked out, injuries, things of that nature. He talked about the joy of building a team from scratch, and certainly that was something that he talked about, that being an exciting thing to be a part of, that you don't really get that opportunity a lot. And obviously that can be a little fraught with peril. I mean, if you have a true expansion team, then especially one built in a COVID year, that was a little bit strange right out of the gate, obviously. But I think he seemed to maybe know that if this was the end, that overall he can look at this as a good run. And I think that in a way he might be, and again, this is just my perception, that kind of given the work-life balance and where he's been and how he's been kind of valiantly trying to get this team to a place above the playoff line to meet that goal, he may just need a little bit of rest. He may need a little bit of decompression when this is all over, if this is all over. But it also sounded like if he's coming on for a 5th year, then he's ready to work, he's ready to assess, he's kind of doing the same things that he would do. And again, certainly debate can be had, does that work? Is the team responsive? All those sorts of things. But yeah, he was overall in a good place. He was challenged by unnamed reporter who asked if you deserve to have another year, and he said yes, unequivocally, simply just that word. So Wolf thinks that he has done enough to earn a 5th year, again, especially I think given what he had to deal with this year and in the previous year, to be honest. But it still holds that of all the 14 teams in the West, it looks like only one, once this gets official, is not going to have made the playoffs in either 2023 or 2024, and that is Austin. And not really acceptable. Again, especially given, as I
Yeah.
pointed out, 14 of the 29 coaches in MLS right now have been there a year or less, and a lot of them were replacing coaches. There's 4 interims right now, coaches that, quite frankly, had better records than Josh.
Thing that I feel bears mentioning is the kind of exceptionalism that does not do favors to building a new franchise. We have seen we've seen attendance go through dips over the last 2 years, but a there was a particularly massive drop off yesterday,
Yeah.
despite ticket sellouts, actual attendance normalizing down, not just because of the start of the college football season or the
Hmm.
NFL season or
Right.
school starting again or
Hmm.
whatever, or blame it on the League's Cup break, which is something that's worth mentioning. I've seen attendance dip across the league,
Yeah.
not even among teams that look at Houston. Houston's attendance has been in the toilet for
Hmm.
ages. And
Yeah.
when they are in good table position, there's a broader conversation that as we're headed toward an off season of nothing to properly talk about and topics to search about, I think there's some assessment of the league to be done. But
Yeah.
specific to Austin, not just because there are people among the fan base who sure can be accused of making the notion of getting the coach fired their entire personality. Yes, that is certainly something that some people who are particularly fixated on that issue could be accused of. At the same time, that the people who are still showing up to the games are
Hmm.
not having to be paid, but just given the slightest hint of a chant to join in on about firing the coach, that sentiment is so wide among casual members of the fan base. I know that I am way further down on the season ticket holder wait list, as I've mentioned in the past, than a lot of people. And I know people who were further down it than I was,
Hmm.
and that they rolled through so many people after loads
Yeah.
of
Uh-huh.
cancellations. I feel like there could be an element of the front office looking at the state of things and going,
Hmm.
we can't validate the quote unquote worst elements of a fan base. We
Hmm.
can't let this or that happen. And I think it also bears mentioning this ownership group is not unaware of what it is like to be in a fractious divide with a fan base. That is part of the narrative, which I
Yeah.
find there are Columbus fans who definitely
Still,
throw some MSG on that just to get some extra
still,
flavor out of the actual reality of a situation.
they
Which,
still don't like us.
yeah, if you want
So
to
many
talk
years later.
about franchises actually moving, which is something that
Hmm.
has happened in other sports and in other leagues, and
Hmm.
hey, happened
Yep.
to the Austin Aztecs, aka the Orlando Lions.
Happened to the San Jose Earthquakes, aka the Houston Dynamo.
Hey, that's another thing we could talk. We could do some of that MLS history stuff. Turns out I
Hmm.
know an MLS history guy. In fact, I'm
Oh
recording with
yeah.
him right now. See, now we're just generating stuff to fill the vacant weeks with to come. I guess like where I'm getting to is it's not just over for the team's chances, and it is not out of some sort of wanting, willing this to happen. I just cannot envision them keeping Josh Wolf on for his remaining contract year and
Right.
not facing not just empty seats at a home opener in 2025, but
Hmm.
much more organized, much more wide scale protests from the fan base who have kept showing up as attendance has declined, has kept buying merch, has kept buying food. Not just the sickos, the casuals. The casuals have had trouble just giving their tickets away. And you can
Hmm.
tout
Yeah.
green energy certification and sellouts all you want. And I keep repeating this, and I know that you feel the same. It's not that we like having to say this, but this is the state of things. And
Hmm.
I don't see I don't see the dismissal of Josh Wolf in advance of the end of his contract as
Hmm.
validation of the worst this or that, or unhealthy this or that or something like that. Look, you look at it like a hedge funder looks at assets under one's control. And this is something that I don't care what the real estate value of all of this stuff is. You were looking at tanking something that previously had incredibly high valuation, not just across this league, but across global football clubs. And you got to give your sporting director an opportunity for a fresh start. And I just
Mhm.
go back to that 1,000-yard stare I saw from Borrell after the Copa Tejas loss in Frisco, where he's had the opportunity to make other moves. This is the big move yet to be made.
The thing is, this is sad. I mean, he's the only head coach that the team's had, and I don't like to generally root for people losing their jobs. It's very disruptive. It's disorienting. Obviously, it's part of the deal when you are coaching in a major sports league. That is going to happen. There's that expectation. But again, yeah, I mean, we learned last night also that okay, so they are playing Portland on Wednesday. They're playing the Galaxy on Saturday. They are not returning home in between that. They are staying out on the West Coast. So those are two road games. Then there's obviously the international break that's happening. And there will be soccer at Q2. The US will be playing Panama in that stretch there. So, if you are hungry for soccer, that will be Pochettino's debut, speaking of new coaches. So that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking is if they are going to get rid of him, and again, if you are using playoffs as the metric for that, it seems like it's headed in that direction. I think it happens before that home finale on the 19th. I don't think they invite the kind of rancor that I think the fans would supply if
Yeah.
Josh is coaching a playoff team or a team that if Josh is coaching a team that has missed the playoffs and is within kind of shouting distance of people who are definitely wolf out. I don't think that goes well. I think that kind of sours the end of the season. I could see at that point letting Josh go, thanking him for his service, Davey Arnaud coming in and being the interim coach for that last game, and then Burrell starting the coaching search. And then we have all kinds of speculation to
Yeah.
get into whether it's going to be someone within MLS, if it's going to be someone within the European network. I think all that kind of work starts. But yeah, if Josh is having to bear the brunt of that and he's coaching the home finale, I think he's here for 25. I don't think they subject him to that if he is coaching that game
Yeah.
without bringing him back next year.
I got to say, for the sake of the franchise, they've got to let him go before decision day. I think that this is called Emergency Podcast. We haven't really done a traditional emergency podcast. We're recording this on
Mhm.
Sunday noonish. We could be recording an actual emergency podcast as soon as tomorrow. Because the calculus that Rodolfo Burrell has to make right now is if Josh is not staying on, do I
Mhm.
subject these players, many of which I will still have on the roster with a new coach?
Mhm.
Do I subject them to a final 3 game stretch that effectively means nothing? The lame
Mhm.
duck stretch with
Mhm.
a coach that is going to be dismissed?
Yeah.
Or do they get that 2 game road stretch with an opportunity to do what they did for the last 20 minutes of last night's game? They
Yeah.
played different in that last 20 minutes that led to those
Mhm.
2 goals. There were definitely some emotion control issues going
Mhm.
on in
Yeah.
places. Something that I probably should have said before now, but I want to say as clearly as I can. As many assertions as there have been that these players stopped caring or stopped putting out effort, they had to sub Bukhari off because he was burning every bit of gas left in the tank. It's not that he was incapable of playing at this level or was a waste, as some people have horrendously, erroneously said about an incredibly talented player that I think the club
Yeah.
is very lucky to have.
Yep.
These players never gave up, never quit, not to the last minute.
Mhm.
And I think the ones that are expected to still be here next season deserve the opportunity to get a couple last games under their belt and get out from under a cloud. And that cloud is Josh Wolf at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, but I think that's where it's at. So again, let's put a pin in this because I have a feeling that maybe as soon as tomorrow we'll be needing to talk about this. I think certainly after next Saturday, depending on where things go. And again, if Austin drops 2 points, if they draw, if they lose at any time in this 3 game stretch, it's over. Portland wins or draws at any time in this 3 game stretch, it's over. So, and again, that could happen Wednesday. I do expect Austin to play with some fire and some grit and a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because again, this is the team that could directly eliminate them. I don't think they want that. I think they're going to come out with kind of as much as they can. Obviously, the Galaxy they matched up with earlier this year. Again, it would be narrative rich to have Diego Fagundes score a goal in Josh Wolf's last game for the other side, not realizing in 2022, oh, this is how it's going to maybe turn out. But I do think, yeah, again, this week, if you care about this team, there are still definitely, I think, narratives that are vital to how this team does going forward. But yeah, in terms of, oh, they're going to pull off a miracle and make the playoffs, it just, yeah, I've kind of felt for the last few weeks now that it was just not going to be enough. And that is manifesting in kind of the cruelest way possible. It would have almost been better for Portland to win. Not that I like to root against Vancouver, but almost better for Portland to win and for this to be done. Have that E next to Austin's name to know conclusively. Not that I root for that, but at least this kind of idea of knowing versus not knowing. We're still in
Yeah.
this limbo state.
Realistically, despite, and this isn't calling the players liars or anything, but from this point, they all know they are eliminated. Spiritually, they have felt like they were in the current impossible hill to climb status. They have realistically known this since the Vancouver loss, that this was what they were headed for. And it just, to your point, it feels kind of cruel that they have to contend with the facade that they are not eliminated from the playoffs when in every realistic
Yeah.
sense they definitely are.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to pivot this in a different direction to wrap
Yeah.
things up today. Cause I mean, again, I know what the fan base is feeling. I mean, I left the stadium pretty sad, pretty deflated. Obviously, you try to have objectivity in covering the team, but also I have feelings. I like these players, so I don't like to see this happen. But let's talk about Austin FC too, and just the wild scenarios that could set up because that is a crazy 5 team race essentially for what, one spot?
Depending on results that are pending today as we record this, which be an
Depending on when you listen to this.
depending on when you listen to this, things may be different, but at least as things stand with a few of the next to last weekend fixtures to play, decision day literally could come down to a 3 to 5 team race for one last playoff spot, which
Yeah.
I mean, that is competitive. That is
Mhm.
interesting. That is spicy. Austin is
Yeah.
playing the formerly named Earthquakes 2, now the Town, the football club, in their Sunday match. The fire and fight from the second team players is they know that the math is against them. Their coach knows that the math is against them to some extent. Horrible officiating has been against them all season. Cards galore, even more freely given for dissent than the first team. But you could also, if you watch these games for which replays are not available, I think for the benefit of the players' long term reputations, in some case, a lot of these guys are still young enough that they are close to having been in the academy and they're used to cameras and scrutiny not being on them as much as a bunch of parents watching them. They are freer with dissent and popping off on refs, on opposing players, on fights starting, which some people, that is for some people, that's the attraction of Next Pro. It's a little spicier, a little younger, and a little more reckless. You know, these are defending champions, some of them who were here last year, some of them who came to this team with its reputation of being kings of the road and coming from behind and having the story of the season that they did last year while finding a rhythm all their own. They're not giving up. And even if it looks real tough on decision day, down 2 of their top players, I feel like they are really going to give people a great show for decision day, regardless of how these 3 key matches go here this evening.
Yeah, and I ran into Brett Utley at halal taza last night. I was eating. I was doing a little pregame in there, as was he. He was watching the games. He was surprised by some of the math that I was laying out, but he seemed calm. He seemed ready for whatever's going to come. There's a scenario, and again, this could be blown by the time that you listen to this, but we have concocted a scenario in which real Monarchs are playing Timbers 2, and if there's a Monarchs PK win, Houston would have to lose to Tacoma, and then for convenience sake, you want SKC to lose to North Texas just to be out of the mix. Although if SKC2 had a PK win in that game as well, you would have all five of those teams tied on 36 points with various tiebreakers, right? So what's best, and again, it's going to, with the tiebreakers set up for Real Monarchs and Timbers 2 to be ahead of Verdos heading into decision day, but that's actually going to be most advantageous because at that point, then all five of those teams in that 8 through 12 logjam are playing separate teams. Nobody's playing head to head. If Austin wins and everybody else does no better than a PK win, then Austin would go to the playoffs should that happen. So again, that said, it's going to be very close. And in terms of the math compared to the first team where the math is dire, the second team math is a lot more interesting and playful, and there are permutations, and it gets into real meaningful sort of thresholds that you can overcome in terms of wins and goal differentials.
And for me, the result has got to be an outright win in a home decision day game for this team
Mhm. Yep.
to stand a good playoff shot, not just to make it into the playoffs, but making it into the playoffs and having a head of momentum to come off of, and players with cards being reset for the playoffs, which I think a lot of them are very much looking forward to.
And then let's say Austin gets the 8th seed. Does
Uh-huh.
North Texas as the top seed pick them? Because again, those teams get to pick their opponents. Would they do that? Would they go against a rival that is coming off a couple wins?
Yeah, I mean, will
Or
North
a PK win and a win?
would North Texas repeat the scared money folly of last year?
Mhm. Right.
They might. They might.
I mean, that would be, but that would be the mathematical choice. A funny thing
Yeah.
about the scared money thing is like Austin was higher up in the table than some of the other teams that SKC2 could have picked. But God bless Benny Feilhaber and that kind of moment of legend. And again, part of why MLS Next Pro is so delicious and so fun.
Yeah, we love poking fun at Benny, and I have
Benny's
been,
great.
but I've been given to understand he loathes having said that because it has been etched into his legend. But I adore it because that is good rivalry. That is good, clean rivalry vibes, and there
Mhm.
needs to be more of
Yeah.
that across
Yeah.
Next Pro and the top league. My feeling is that so North Texas has clinched everything that there is to clinch. They have all of the lowercase letters next to their name. They don't need to beat SKC
Mhm.
for points, for seed position. They have all of that
Mhm.
locked up. And that's really the worst thing going into these three games. And that's the first one that's kicking off in 2 hours as of me saying these words right now. But of those three, boy, would it be great if North Texas won outright away at SKC for Austin's chances. In the Rail
Okay.
Monarchs Portland matchup, that's the
Mhm.
one that, to your point, there are multiple paths in terms of the way that it could go, and Austin still technically
Right.
be fine. I'm coming down
Yeah.
on the side of that needs to be an outright Rail Monarchs win to just
Mm.
starve
Okay.
Portland of points.
Okay.
With
But that puts
hold
Real
on,
Monarchs up then.
it
Yeah.
puts
Yeah.
them
Okay.
up. It puts them up.
Right.
But when you look at their decision day setup, I think they are more likely to lose that. And if
Okay.
we're going, and this is all going with the assumption of Austin wins decision day against the
Right.
town, the football club of Next Pro in the greater San Jose area.
Right.
And then 9 p.m. game after that 8 p.m. game between the Royal Royals and the Toombers. Tacoma's got to beat Houston. Just for the cleanest situation to
Mhm.
me is
Yeah.
going with the assumption of Austin is going to look at decision day as they've got to win that because they do not show up at their home field and lose after various losses this season that they would love to forget, that they would love to wipe away with a good, clean end of the season, with the assumption that they are definitely going to win that game outright.
Yeah.
That to me is how I think the vibes, the momentum will end up benefiting Austin the best. Though, again, Real Monarchs Portland can go other ways and they still be okay. Need the heat of Real Monarchs coming up and some math going against Portland. That, I think, is the most psychologically beneficial.
The good thing is that Austin got points on Friday. Like everything else is happening today. So kind of where it settles, they are still in the mix regardless. And there are some results that could go quite badly. Like if Houston wins, for example, then that probably freezes Austin out. But it's going to be, it sets up, and we may talk about this before next week's decision day. You're going to see Austin in the mix with something to play for, most likely.
Yeah.
And we'll have a better sense and can break it down there, kind of depending on how everything goes. But again, if you are hungry for some playoff drama, it exists. It just exists for the second team.
Yeah. Even if these results do not go Austin's way, I feel like the big thing that those younger Next Pro players have to play on decision day is you got Peter Grogan, who has gotten minutes in a couple games running now, who is looking real friggin' impressive. I got to be honest. Like the few minutes he's been having, the reason people are are clamoring to see him play more is because what they're seeing is looking real good. I talked to him after the match on Friday night, and he acknowledged that getting acclimated to the heat really has been a thing. And yes, it might be cooling off, but it hasn't been cool for a couple weeks.
Cooling off is relative too.
True. Austin breeze is desert temperatures for people from cold, rainy Ireland. I feel like these players have yet more to prove about their value within this squad, within where they go from here. Alonso Ramirez's loan from Atlas ends in December, as does his contract at Atlas.
Yeah.
Does he get re-signed? Does he maybe already have a green card? Rather than buy him out, are they letting that contract expire? They have a deal already set up. Word from Josh, word from first team players was that Alonso dropped right in first team training when they were short on the roster. That is a player in particular, not just because of the armband. That's a player in particular that I would be very surprised to see leave the organization if there is a way for them to avoid it. Really talented midfielder. Irvin Torres, 16 whole years old, has been incredibly impressive playing the midfield for them. These are just a few guys that I'm highlighting. There have been some really surprising standout performances. Chris Garcia had a whole cheering section at Friday night's game. He's been injured the majority of the season. It's been great getting to see him get some minutes and get back into play. One of the things I love most about the Friday Night Lights atmosphere of Palmer Field is getting to get this advanced look at this next generation of players coming up, some of whom who, for a variety of factors, might end up, in USL to get minutes on loan, to get minutes in general because of international status. There's only so much that can be done.
Sometimes that's their ceiling.
Yeah, I continue to believe that Next Pro's third division soccer is absolutely one of the best tickets, if anything, maybe the best value for your money ticket in North American soccer right now. It is incredible the level of sometimes you show up at Palmer Field and Maxime Crépeau is playing goal for LAFC too.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff
that was a game. That was great.
That was great.
Yeah. So let's wrap. So, because we are on a positive, we're not gonna slide back. So again, just thinking about what goes down. Yeah, we will try to record again before decision day for the second team, just lay out what transpired here on Sunday. And then obviously if there is some coaching news for the first team, we'll get at that. So I do confess that I have been pre-writing something over the weekend that, I'm kind of expecting to be posting in the next couple of weeks, but we'll just see where it goes. It's definitely the thing that I think the entire fan base is watching, but also don't sleep on the second team and their playoff chances, just because, again, that is something that you can feel good about. That's something that you can feel hopeful about. And again, next season's going to be around before you know it. Whatever permutation it's in and whatever happens in that winter transfer window, I believe that it's going to be a better first team in 25 for sure. However it's going to get built, whoever's going to lead it, whatever is going to happen, I do feel that there's hope ahead right? The kind of bleakness and weirdness of the season. And there were patches where you saw those flashes. You saw a really good team kind of trying to break out, but there's just been so much in the way. You look back to that first game, those first 5 games, like it just out of the gate, something didn't feel right, and it just never sort of righted itself except for these little kind of patches here and there. And here I go negative again.
Nowhere to go but up, and look forward to that. And you'll hear from us again pretty soon, maybe sooner than soon. Who knows?
Yeah. And thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Just keep the hope alive. Stay strong. I know that this is a weird juncture for the fan base. Like I said, I did not particularly relish how I felt when I left the stadium. Knew that I was going to write today, knew what I was going to put in from the press conference, but also, yeah, there's just this feeling of it coming to another playoff list, and that's not a great feeling. All right. So
Cool.
I got to get a kid to Girl Scouts.
Where's Phil? He usually starts this off.
He's teaching in San Antonio today. Colby, go ahead and start us off.